Good afternoon, Year 9. Hope everyone's well. Today we are going to look at computer memory, following on from last week's lesson about the CPU. First activity before we get stuck in, just a little do now activity. I'm sure you've missed these a lot. In your books or on a computer, whatever, pause this video and please have a go at explaining what happens at each stage. What happens in the fetch stage, the decode stage, and then the execute stage. Like I say, feel free to pause this video. I will show you the answer at the end of the slide, but I do hope you take it a bit seriously and do have a go at it for me. It will help in the long run. Right then, lesson objectives today. Objective 1, to understand what we mean by memory in terms of a computer. Number 2, the difference between RAM and ROM. And number 3, what virtual memory is. So what is memory? It's not really a definition of what it is, but this is just how it's stored. But memory is stored in blocks with being given an address and data. Addresses start from 0, not 1. That's not really much more to say about that one. Types of memory. There are 3 types that you need to be concerned about specifically if you are doing the GCSE. RAM, ROM and virtual memory. So RAM, what does RAM stand for? RAM stands for Random Access Memory. Every computer device, regardless of its size or its function, has RAM. Whether it's your microwave, your washing machine, they will have a small amount of RAM if they're digital ones that could have controls like that. Your PlayStation, your phone, your calculator, they all have an amount of RAM. Obviously, a calculator doesn't need very much because it only does one thing, whereas your PlayStation will use a lot of RAM for the video and graphics and stuff. Currently, most computers, I think in this case, are talking about desktops and laptops, run between 2 and 8 gig of RAM. Certainly, the sort of laptops you'd buy from PC World, and computers from PC World, unlikely to have more than 8 gig of RAM in them, mainly because for 95% of people, you don't need more than 8 gig. If you're the sort of person like my mum, you're only running Word and PowerPoint, 8 gig's more than enough. However, this is going to get bigger and bigger as years go on. The reason for this is because computers hog more, the programs hog more resources. If, for example, you edit a video, the example I'll give you, as I've mentioned before, using a Premiere Pro on my personal computer, which has got 16 gig of RAM in it, a Premiere Pro will use all of them when it's rendering a video, just because it's a very RAM intensive task. Unless I say otherwise, Premiere Pro will use all of it. If I put 32 gig in there, Premiere Pro will use it. As programs get more complicated, like Word, and they're able to do more things, or they have more options on the screen, and you've got fancy backgrounds and all this stuff, it just needs more RAM. So that's generally why the amount of RAM in a computer steadily goes up over every couple of years. What does RAM actually do? RAM stores the program instructions for programs that are currently running or for files that are currently open. For example, if it's in Word, the program instructions for Word and the document itself will be held in the RAM. Whereas all this data when it's not being used, it's not anywhere, it's just not being used. RAM is what's known as volatile. What that means is when you turn the computer off, anything held in the RAM is permanently deleted. So basically, when you restart your computer and you turn it back on, it doesn't automatically open up with Word at the document you were on. You'd have to reopen Word and reopen the document. That's why, for saving it, it's why I'm a big fan of using the online versions of Word and PowerPoint for schoolwork. That you can't lose any work then. I'm sure, well, certainly people my age and your parents' age and stuff, we've all lost work in the past. It's proving a pain in the backside to put it back together again. So, volatile. That's the key word. You'll hear that a lot if you're doing GCSE. A little task for you there. At some point, not necessarily right this second, but at some point, write your own definition of the word volatile, please. This is just where the RAM sits in between, the computer and in how it sits, on the motherboard. You've got the CPU, which got the control unit in it, the registers, and the arithmetic logic unit, and the RAM just feeds in and out of there. Again, you can come back to this task rather than doing it now, but you can do it now, or you can do it at the end of the video when you've watched all the video. It doesn't really bother me. Right, a summary of what RAM does, what sort of information is stored in there, how long is it stored for, that sort of thing. I'm not sure that's a challenge question. No, you'd have to look that one up on the internet. So, ROM, much smaller amount of memory, but more important, arguably. So again, all computers have a ROM chip. It won't work without it. ROM stands for read-only memory. So normally 99% of the time you can't change the information on there. You can if you really need to, like on your laptop, say they'll have little files that can actually update it, but as a general rule you can't get in there and edit it. But what's important about what's kept in a ROM file is the BIOS for your computer, this kind of system information, but also more importantly the startup instructions, how the computer actually goes from when you press the power button, what does it actually do in order to work. Now ROM will be non-volatile because it stores information when you turn the computer off, otherwise how would it know what to do when you turn the thing back on again? Again, a little task to do it now or do it at the end, don't really mind. Write a little summary of ROM, what it does, why it's important. There will be links to a couple of videos on Show My Homework from Craig and Dave. Maybe not the most exciting videos in the world, but they are very helpful. Also, as usual, BBC Bite-Size stuff, which is usually very good. Right, the last thing we're going to look at today, virtual memory. So if you've got 2 gig of RAM in your computer, which would be like a fairly old laptop, so you've got Windows running already, obviously that's how you know the computer's on, and you've got 3 programs running at the same time. What happens when the RAM gets full? If the RAM gets full, that means the computer cannot store any more data needed in there for the programs currently running. So rather than the computer just saying, look, the RAM's full, can't do any more, Windows and other operating systems like the Linux we looked at in the past, they use something called virtual memory. Virtual memory will extend the available amount of RAM by using a section of your hard drive called swap space or page file. I know the page file on my computer is about 13 gig, so I'd probably prescribe that down to Premiere Pro making it that big, but it's usually a fairly hefty file. Excuse me. Virtual memory will use the hard drive as extra RAM. This extends the amount of memory available on a computer, which is essential with dealing with programs which require a lot of RAM, such as image editing or videos. The problem is hard drives, even SSD drives, are slower than using RAM. The RAM is plugged directly into the motherboard, and arguably the hard drives are as well, but it is, I mean, when they say slower, I don't think it's measurable by a human, but it is significantly slower. I don't think you'd notice it, certainly with an SSD. It can mean, though, that it does still slow down significantly, particularly on an older laptop. It would slow down quite a lot. How do we avoid using virtual memory? Well, the easy option would to be run 1 program at a time, or you install more RAM, which is expensive, but quite fairly easy to do. Right, last little task for you guys, please. Write a summary of what virtual memory is. In your answer, write what is virtual memory. Don't worry about what thrashing is, because we didn't cover it. What effect does using virtual memory have on a computer, and how can we avoid using too much virtual memory? Recap lesson objectives. Understand what we mean by memory. In this case, it's where we store information for program files, startup information for the computer, not necessarily just like where you would store picture files, Word documents, music and stuff like that. It's another difference between RAM and ROM. Random access memory is volatile, which means everything in there is lost when you turn the computer off. ROM is read-only memory, which is a very small file, only contains 2 bits of data, the BIOS and the startup instruction. Obviously, without startup instructions, your computer won't switch on. And thirdly, to know what virtual memory is, basically an extension of the RAM held on your hard drive. And lastly, here are the answers to the do now right up at the beginning of the lesson. Fetch, decode, execute cycle start with fetch. The next instruction from memory and increment the program counter. Execute is the action of the instruction being put into the instruction register. And finally, decode the bit pattern into the instruction register. Okay, that's the answers anyway. So, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Feel free to watch the video over and over again if you want to. I'm sure you find these highly exciting if you've even listened this far into the video. Message me on Show My Homework, message me on or by email. Feel free to ask any questions. Do have a read of the BBC stuff starting on page 7, going on to page 8 and 9 as well. They're quite helpful. And yeah, I hope you guys are all okay, and I'll catch you next week.